All right, we are live. Good morning, class. Welcome back to our study of the book of Genesis. We've got one or maybe two, depending on how far we get, very interesting stories to do today. Stories that are iconic, I guess, in the book of Genesis. It's a weird thing to say. But yeah, I mean, Genesis is full of these sort of standout stories. I think the way they're often handled is in isolation, so you don't see how they all fit together necessarily. Like Noah's Ark, very famous story, but usually told with really no context to it. Jacob and Esau. A lot of times we know about like the stealing of the birthright. That's less than a half the story. Like there's a lot more story to go. So I like doing this format, and hopefully it's been revelatory for you. So where we left off in the story is Jacob's finally going back home. And we'll get there in a minute. But first, who wants to do our summary this morning? Just kidding. I tell you what, though, if we were in a different format, if we were sitting like round table and like there was no camera involved, we might, But I don't want to put y'all on the spot like that. So the story, the book is the book of Genesis, and who knows what Genesis means? Beginning, that's right. The name we get comes from the Greek. Most of our Old Testament book names, New Testament as well, come from the Greek, actually, which is weird because they weren't written in Greek, but that's kind of the way we inherited those names. Genesis. It's a book titled For the Beginning. It's both the beginning of everything, as we have the story of creation. But also, it has a few other important beginnings about it. We have, of course, the beginning of the Messianic prophecies, right, which come as early as the day that we fall into sin. We have the beginning of the establishment of God's people, which surely begins with Adam and Eve, right, as they are engaged in worship, Cain and Abel as well. Sacrificial worship, even from like the moment they've left the garden. But we tend to refine that more. So we get a new beginning in Noah and his family, right, as almost everything is wiped away and God starts fresh. But it really is the story of Abraham and the lineage descended from him that we look at as the beginning of God's people. Why was Abraham God's guy? Why is he the father of the chosen people? I'm sorry? Because God made him? Well, yeah. I mean, that is kind of the answer, right? Abraham really hadn't done anything of worth until God said, Abraham, you're going to be my guy. And from you, I will make a great people and a great nation, and all nations will be blessed through you. And, it's interesting. When you read how God talks to Abraham, I don't remember God saying, I will bless your people to the exclusion of everybody else. Do you read that? Because sometimes that's like the attitude that people have about the children of Abraham, that God has a special deal with them. The specialness comes from that the promised Messiah is going to come from their lineage, right? Abraham is God's chosen people by covenant, by promise. God made promises to Abraham, and Abraham believed them and acted according to them. Some of the time. Isaac becomes an heir of those same promises. God makes promises to Isaac. Isaac believes them. Isaac is God's man. We have been reading the story of Jacob. And most recently, no, we haven't got there yet. Today is the day that we'll get Jacob's name change, which is an exciting and interesting and bewildering story. Spoilers. His name will become Israel, right? The Bible will talk about his chosen people, right? That chosenness was never genetic. And in fact, if you remember from the story of Jacob, it was never fundamentally genetic, I should say. If you remember the story of Jacob, when he's deceiving his father, he refers to Isaac's God blessing him. And it isn't until later on when he has an encounter with God at Bethel that he says, "Oh, you're my God." If this was a matter of genetic legacy, that would have never been a question, right? It's a matter of God's promise and your faith in the promise. Those are the two pieces that make you God's people. If we were to read the whole Old Testament, you will find many times when people born to other nations become part of Israel. And importantly, some of those are the ancestors of Jesus. So, what we've been reading is a story so far of God cultivating faith and trust in the hearts of this particular family, generation upon generation. And each generation, God has to work on the next, on that guy, right? Like, Abraham took a whole lot of growing up over the course of his story. Isaac, similarly, we get a little less about Isaac, but he has a similar arc in some cases. And here we see in Jacob a lot of character transformation. Let's drill down into the story of Jacob a little bit. Isaac and Rebekah have been waiting a long time to have children, and when they finally do, it's twins. And the names of those two children are Esau and Jacob. Esau, so named because he is red and hairy, and you can imagine like he comes out as a linebacker, He loves to hunt. He's dad's favorite, right? Jacob, his name means, anybody remember? Heel grabber. Because purportedly he, even in the womb, was grabbing onto Esau's heel, and as they were born, there is no rest for mom because baby 1 is born, baby 2 is born right on his heels, right? As Jacob is clinging onto him. And that's a bit of a symbol, right? It probably actually happened. I don't have any reason to think it didn't actually happen, but it's also an omen, if you will, of things to come, which is that on the one hand, Jacob is benefiting off of the work of Esau, right, as he's getting towed across the finish line. But also, it's sort of like, if you can imagine a race to be the firstborn, it's like he's trying to cheat, like tripping up the guy in front of him, or snatching out what ought to be his. Esau is foolish and impulsive and controlled by his appetites, it seems. We see this as he sells off his birthright for a bowl of stew, because what good is a birthright to a dead man, right? I don't eat that stew right now, I will die, which is surely not true. And we also see this in how he married the local Hittite Canaanite women, right, who I'm sure were easy on the eyes, but made life miserable for Isaac and Rebekah. And he's got 2 wives before Jacob ever has his first. Also, if I haven't made this clear, and I bring this up because polygamy is so abundant in this book. It's never a good idea, polygamy, right? Never works out well. Jacob impersonates his brother so that when his father intends to give his final blessing, Jacob appears to be Esau, and his father gives the blessing he intended to Esau to Jacob instead. Esau, when he learns this, is furious. Isaac is heartbroken. And of course he is. His wife and son conspired to make a fool of him and to take from his favorite son that which he had intended to give to him. Have I mentioned to you that I think having favorite children is a bad idea? Okay. Well, between him and the dog, it's close. But I guess I'll give him the edge. Yeah. He likes to tell me sometimes that I'm his favorite dad, by the way. And then, no joke, I kid you not, he says, well, second favorite. God's my favorite. Okay. Yeah, you're right. And I don't mind taking the L on that one. So Esau comforts himself with fantasies of murdering his brother. He just can't wait. When his dad finally does pass away, he's going to kill his brother and feel a lot better about life. And Rebekah hears about that and says, we need to get you out of the house. Let's send you back to where I come from, to Laban's house in Haran. And so she says to Isaac, hey, I've noticed Jacob needs a wife. I'm not going to live forever. Let's get him a good, I can't say a good Jewish girl because Judah hasn't been born yet. But that's kind of the sense you get. Yeah, for him to marry a Jewish girl, he'd have to be a time traveler and then create all kinds of paradoxes. Anyway, so Isaac's like, oh, well, we should send him back to Haran, and maybe he can find a good wife there. And she's like, honey, you're so smart. So Jacob travels back to Haran, and there he sees Rachel, and he falls madly in love with her. And he meets her dad, and he says, hey, I want to marry your daughter. And his dad's like, well, great. If you'll just work for me for 7 years, you can marry my daughter. Now, Jacob should have read the fine print. Because he does indeed, after 7 years, marry Laban's daughter, his older daughter, Leah, who apparently was less sought after. And in the morning, when Jacob can see his wife, putting the most charitable spin on it, when he can see his wife in the light of day, I don't know what kind of partying they were doing at the wedding, so who knows? But at least it was dark probably when Leah came into the tent. But in the morning, he realizes what happened, and he says, Laban, what? I worked for 7 years to marry your daughter. And Laban's like, what? You told me it was nothing because you loved her so much. It was easy. Around here, you can't marry off the younger daughter before the older daughter gets married. So you married. You still want to marry her? That'll be 7 years of labor, please. And so he does. Another 7 years of labor. Finally, does marry Rachel. He's got these two wives, and Leah is bearing children, and Rachel is not. And Jacob is just making money for Laban like it's nobody's business. I mean, everything he touched prospers. Rachel has a bunch of kids. Leah has a bunch of kids. Rachel's jealous and heartbroken, so she gives her servant girl to Jacob, and they have some kids, and then Leah's not having kids, and so she gets real jealous of that whole situation. So she gives her servant to Jacob, and then they start having kids. And Rachel's like, I still haven't had any kids. And then God's like, well, here you go. And he has a kid. And that child's name is Joseph. And so now Jacob has a whole mess of kids. Technically four wives, although only two of them get treated like proper wives, which is awful. And he's like, you know what? We got to go. And so he negotiates with Laban to take his family and go. And Laban's like, hey, let's make an arrangement about paying you for all your services these last several years. And there's a whole thing about spotted sheep, and we've been down that road. Ultimately, God blesses Jacob in. There's a bit of good husbandry on Jacob's part and a bit of blessing on God's part that leaves Jacob in a very strong financial position as he leaves, way better than Laban's sons, which serves them right for trying to cheat him in the first place. But that's another story. So Jacob's hot-footing it out of there. And Laban tries to be cool, like, hey, why didn't you tell me you're leaving? We could have thrown you a party, hadn't I said no? Jacob's like, peace, brother, I'm out of here. And so he does get away unscathed, and he has an encounter with God, and another encounter with God, and he steals himself to meet his brother. So he takes his wealth and family, splits it up, and then he starts sending wave after wave of livestock and wealth ahead of him to butter up his brother Esau. Hey, let him know, Jacob, your servant, wants you to have this. And that's pretty much where we left off, if I remember right. At Genesis 32, verse 21 is where I think we stopped. So he sent these waves and waves of gifts ahead of him with messages of deference to his estranged brother. Verse 22. That night Jacob got up and took his two wives and his two female servants and and see how it says, not his four wives? Bothers me. Hope it bothers you. And his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. Probably didn't have that name yet. It will later. But after he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Well, that's random. Can you imagine? Bye, hon. See you in a minute. Turn around and there's a dude just like cracking his knuckles or, let's go. Part of me wishes it was like he had like some run-in music like on the professional wrestling, What is going on? What's that? I don't. Yes. Oh yeah. Now think about this. How would you describe Jacob in the first part of the story, back when he's in his father's house? What would be some of the descriptors he'd use? What's it? Did you say wimpy? Yeah? Mama's boy? What else? Spoiled? He's had 20 odd years in Laban's house. What has that done to him? Yeah. He's been on the other side of treachery, right? No longer is he the one conning and deceiving. He's been the one that's been taken advantage of. So, yeah, probably grounded him, gave him some humility. He's been laboring hard, physical manual labor, presumably. If he left as, and it doesn't give us ages, but let's say if he left as his twin brother already has 2 wives. So I don't think he's less than probably like 19 or 20. He could be a bit older, but let's just say, if he left as a young adult, been gone for 20 years. Physically speaking, how many of us were more in our prime in our 20s than in our 40s? I'm not asking about you personally. Me, I've never been stronger and healthier at this age. So in theory, he could be slowing down a bit, but actually the way that it works out, I think, is that he has kind of hardened, kind of grown into himself a bit. Such that, have any of y'all ever wrestled? Jiu-jitsu or conventional Greco-Roman or any of that? Okay. How long is a round? Let's go with 2 minutes. How do you feel after 2 minutes? Yeah, you're dead. Right? Like, if you've never wrestled, and I'm not a wrestler per se. We did a little bit of stuff in our karate classes, but well, I'll tell you what, man. 2 rounds of stand-up sparring, or like a 2-minute round of stand-up sparring, it's tiring. 2 minutes of wrestling, forget about it. Like you're engaging every muscle you have all the time. How long did Jacob wrestle for? I bet it was more than 2 minutes if he wrestled until daybreak. Yeah, so he's wrestling all night. Verse 25. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." Okay, first off, if you know the story at all, is this a man that he's wrestling with? Who is this character? What's that? God. Now, Scripture will refer, like Hosea will talk about this, and he'll refer to the person that he's wrestling with as an angel. Some things you should know, because there's some ambiguity. Sometimes in the Old Testament, the phrase the angel of the Lord is used, and it could simply be that it is an angel, but it could also be that this is an appearance of God, right? Let's take the lowercase. Let's just assume it's an angel, like Hosea says, like lowercase a angel, right? Do you really think Jacob has the power to resist an angel? Think for a minute about what we've read in Genesis already. When have we seen angels appear in Genesis? Give me a couple instances. Okay, Sodom and Gomorrah, that would be a good example. They razed a whole city to the ground. Is Jacob more powerful than that? Garden of Eden, you mentioned, right? What's he doing in the Garden of Eden? Yeah. Yeah. You think people might want to get back in, but nobody's getting past this guy, right? So when the Bible describes this event as, the angels seeing that he could not overpower him, there's got to be a couple things going on here. Either, number one, when God sends this angel, he kind of put some limits on what he could do. Or, number two, he's wrestling with Jacob the way that you might wrestle with a child or a grandchild, right? Which is to say, I'm not going to bring to bear my full force, right? Just keep that in mind as you read it, because if you just read it flatly with no context, it's going to seem like, wow, Jacob's really strong. And I think this is much more a test of his character than it is of his physical prowess, right? He's wrestling, and Jacob doesn't quit. I think that's the thing that's being said here. Now, if you interpret that elsewise, I don't think that's going to impact your salvation in any particular way, but I'm just trying to make sense of the story, right? And hopefully you are too. While at the same time accepting that these words are true. These words are truer than any interpretation I give you of the words. So the wrestling is happening, and daybreak is coming, and so what does the wrestler do to him? Yeah, he breaks him. As I read it, it sounds like he could have done this at any particular time. Which tells you that, at least for the angel's perspective, this is not a life and death struggle, right? If you're in a real life and death struggle, use your dirty tricks. Live, That's not what this is. He's been working out Jacob. So he pops his hip. This whole thing is not a test of Jacob's strength, because God doesn't know it. You know who's learning something in this moment? Probably not the angel. Whose benefit is this for? Jacob. All right. So, the man pops his hip and says, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not go unless you bless me." It's a bit audacious, right? But he must understand something about what's happening here. Now, he's already had a few encounters with God. And as you'll see later on, he gets that this is a struggle with God. And so he got his first blessing through deceit. Remember that? I think, and when Hosea writes about this, he talks about, crying and pleading, which, if he's talking to God, makes that prayer. So this is not a mediated thing of, Isaac, God's favorite, giving a blessing to one of two whatever sons. This is Jacob stepping into his own relationship with God, struggling with God, and asking God to bless him. Which is a weird thing to say if the partner he's wrestling with is an opponent. But I don't think that that's what it is. Okay, so Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. What does Jacob mean? Heel grabber. Does it have positive connotations? No, right? You're a cheater. You are looking to disrupt your fellow man, right? It was literally a description of his relationship to his brother. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." All right, so what does Israel mean? Struggles with God or wrestles with God. That is the name that God's people will bear into perpetuity, and a name that even we claim. Never mind that there is a place on the map you can point to it as the nation of Israel. That's coincidental almost to what the Bible's talking about. The people of God are people who will wrestle with God. And if you understand the scene properly, the angel could have obliterated him at any moment. And he kind of shows that when he's ready to end the fight. Pop. And he could probably keep popping all the joints until he's got none left, right? But he doesn't. So, what would you call that then? It's a stick. Oh, the end of that fight's the best. He's like, "Come back, I'll gnaw your ankles off." If you don't know what I'm talking about, you're uncultured and I can't help you. Yeah. So, to the outside observer looking in, it might look like Jacob actually has the power in this situation. But if you understand what's going on, no, the whole thing is an act of God stretching him wrestling with God's immovability. And ultimately, the whole thing is resolved by him asking for God's blessing. Yeah. Yeah. And I would like to tell you that the name Israel means, struggles alongside of God, but that's not what it means, though. This is the people who wrestle with God. But maybe that ought to give us some encouragement too, because I think a lot of religions that are invented from the ideas of man think that to be enlightened means you have made peace with God, right? And if you haven't made peace with God, you haven't got there yet. But the biblical way of talking about this is, no, if you've been called by God, you're gonna struggle with God. And that's not because God is wrong. But it also doesn't mean that you're not ready for God, or that God isn't ready to accept you yet. Everybody we've read about so far is struggling in their faith and struggling personally at times. And yeah, God could just bring the hammer down if he wanted to, but he doesn't. And I do think, you can imagine a belligerent teenager popping off to his dad. His dad's still probably having the wherewithal to just lay the kid out. But he probably doesn't. Now, in some houses, maybe he does. But, our Father is willing to wrestle with us and not destroy us. What's up? I think so. Yeah, yeah, God's pretty secure when you get down to it. Yeah. Yeah. And so my encouragement to you is, it is okay and even good to struggle with God. So long as at the end of the day you remember that he is right and you're not. He is sovereign and you're not. But having that struggle doesn't delegitimize you as his child. It just means that you've got hang-ups. And at the end of the day, after struggling all night, I guess at the beginning of the day, in that case, at the beginning of the day, he's still willing to bless him, redefines him. No longer are you defined primarily by your contentious relationship with your fellow man. You are defined firstly by your encounter with me. You're not a heel grabber anymore. Then Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then blessed him there. Okay, now, I have thoughts about this, but they're all theories, so handle them lightly. The person that he wrestles with is coy about his own name. Why might that be? Okay, so maybe, and that's what some of the commentators I read suggest is well, you don't need to ask my name. You know who I am. Maybe. And if what we have here is just the incarnate Christ, right? The incarnate Son wrestling with him. He's actually wrestling with God himself. That's probably right. But if this is an angel, I kind of wonder if this is a way of staving off a potential idolatry. If he wrestles with him and he's like, "Well, what's your name?" Gabriel, Michael, whatever, right? Well, what happens if Jacob starts building an altar to Gabriel or Michael? It's problematic, right? Is that what's going on here? I don't know. And I just named two angels I happen to know the names of, right? We aren't given a lot of names of angels in the Bible. If you go into the Apocrypha and some of the other stuff, you might get some more angel names, but who cares? If you care, maybe refocus. Point being, I think if this is just an angel working as God's agent, it might be that kind of thing where it's my name's not the thing you should be focused on right now. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." Now this is an interesting thing, because elsewhere in Scripture, some of God's prophets will not be shown God's face, because if they saw it, they would die, right? Did he see God face to face? Maybe. In the way that people who saw Jesus face to face saw the face of God, then maybe yes. Or maybe not. Maybe this is an angel and he didn't. But Nevertheless, the important thing to get out of this is he understands that he was shown mercy. He was spared. He could have been wiped out. For him to say, I saw God's face and I didn't die, is not him bragging, because he says, and yet my life was spared. I understand that it's a mercy that I'm able to limp away from this fight. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel. Oh, by the way, just Pen means face. El means God. So when you see endings that have El or Yel, those often mean God or of God, and then the thing before it is like the thing it's describing. So like the name Daniel is God as judge or judgment of God, something like that. Nathaniel literally means God's gift, right? Gift of God is Nathaniel. So yeah, Peniel. Real quick aside about the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. A very, very literal translation of that would be something like, you shall have no other gods in front of my face. It's that same pen word in there. It's not that you may have no other gods of higher prominence than me. The other one's actually more restrictive, right? Because if you could have other gods just not higher in prominence than God, then you could have multiple gods. He just has to be the highest one. But if it's you can have no other gods as long as I'm watching, well, he's always there, right? Everything is before his face. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Interesting little cultural side note. I don't have a lot of theology to pull out of that per se, but I do want to consider something narratively. Where is Jacob going right now? To meet his brother. What is he expecting out of that meeting? Potentially death, right? Potentially death. His brother, last he knew, had designs on killing him. Maybe Jacob got big and strong and healthy, working in Laban's house. Maybe he could go toe-to-toe with Esau, but not anymore. The opportunity for physical conflict between him and his brother has been taken away. He's going to limp. Which means that he is at his brother's mercy, in a sense, right? Unless, of course, God is his shield, which is the reality of the situation. It's an interesting arc for Jacob. He began as someone who benefited from others through grift and deceit. Then he became very self-sufficient, and if you don't look at God's blessing on it, he looks very much like a self-made millionaire or multimillionaire. Probably not a billionaire, but self-made millionaire from his time in Laban's house. But even that era is coming to an end now. He's going to be vulnerable and dependent moving forward. I can't imagine being a dad of, what are we at now, 11 sons, 12 sons, something like that, and some daughters as well, and hobbling around. That's rough. And we got like 3 minutes to go. You know what? Let's just do the first 5 verses of 33, and then we'll just come back and restart that in our next session. I just don't want to. I just like it. I just want to read these verses with you. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 female servants, and he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. Okay, just to be clear, he is definitely laying out his priorities, right? We're going to put the servants in the front, and then the less favored wife, and then the favored wife. Buddy. All right, so anyway, he's done that. But then he himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Finally, he's leading from the front. He's even putting himself in front of the servants, right? He's doing the proper husband thing, which is to be the shield for the family. And it's his own sins that he's in trouble for anyways. It's not any of their fault. Verse 4. So, Jacob takes a few steps and bows down. Takes a few steps, bows down. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him, fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and the children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." And the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Years, 22 years, something like that, of living with the sword of Damocles hanging over his head, Jacob just knowing I can never go home. Or at least I can't go home anytime soon. So sure. We got to watch Jacob kind of grow up and become a man from a young man, But apparently Esau's had some time too. We don't get to see Esau's story of 20 years separated from his brother. Maybe watching how his mom mourns having lost her favorite son. Maybe a 19-year-old or a 20-something is now in his middle years. He's got a family of his own, wives and kids, and maybe he gets to reflect on things. Priorities changed. The scene here is, it's reminiscent of the same thing when Jesus tells the story of the father greeting the son after the prodigal son has run away. It's like the same picture. Runs out and embrace, and they just cry together. Now, these aren't just brothers, they're twins. I just think it's a beautiful scene. Anyways, that's we're at time now, so we'll wrap up there. We'll restart the chapter when we get together next time, and I can get all doe-eyed and teary about it again. But thanks for hanging on. I want to give you a little look ahead real quick. We've been at this study for a long time. Moreover, there is some content in chapter 34 that's sensitive and maybe sometimes we get mixed, we get kids and stuff in here. My plan is actually we're going to just gloss 34, 35, 36. I'll give you a summary of what happens in them briefly, but I'd rather just stick to kind of the main story of Jacob becoming Israel and then moving on, and we'll get into Joseph pretty rapidly. I hope that doesn't disappoint you terribly. You should have your own copy of a Bible. Feel free to read it. And if it generates questions that you want to discuss, I am your pastor. I'm available to you. We can talk about them. But I think just because of the setting, we might just kind of vault a little bit and go straight from 33 to 37. Anyways, that's it. We got church coming up in 7 minutes, so go freshen up your coffee, eat some donuts, I guess, and come on back.